part 2 of chapter 13. We're going to start here with understanding how muscles are named, and this can be based on a variety of different characteristics. And here you have 4 that are listed. In your textbook you have 7. And the big one is going to be size. Alright, so gluteus maximus is the largest buttock muscle. So the gluteus is your behind, maximus is going to be large. So you have a combination of location, which is the third here on the list, as well as size that goes into naming the actual muscle. Alright, shape can also be a factor. The deltoid is triangular, and the Greek letter for delta is a triangle. And so you have to think about the fact that some of these muscles, even though modern medicine is modern, medicine goes back thousands of years. And these individuals were speaking Greek at that time. So it makes sense that that's where some of our names for these muscles come from. Location, mention that with size. The frontalis overlies the frontal bone. The gluteus is in your behind. All right, and also the direction of the muscle fiber. The rectus abdominis is longitudinal. Rectus means straight. And in your textbook, you also have the examples of attachment, the location that it actually attaches to a bone, the number of attachments, and then also the action. What is the purpose, the action behind that part of muscle? All right, here is a fun picture, not necessarily with all the words that are on there, but just showing the different muscle groups that you can see whether you're looking at the anterior view, the frontal view, or the posterior view, or the back view in B. All right, you do not need to know these muscles. If you are in an anatomy and physiology class, you would be required to memorize those. But, you know, this is just a cool, nerdy, scientific, medical picture. All right, moving on to section 13.2 and looking at the actual muscle fibers and the muscle cells and how these are created and maintained and called. All right, so muscle fibers are going to be arranged in in bundles, and you can see bundles of muscle fibers here. All right, those are the groups of muscles that I was talking about, and those are going to be called fascicles. Then there are myofibrils, are bundles of myofilaments that run the length of a fiber, and we'll see more pictures coming up. Myofilaments are proteins, and the major proteins within muscle are actin and myosin. These are arranged in repeating units. It's a very organized structure, so to speak. And then the sarcomeres are the repeating units of actin and myosin found along the myofibril. So here you have all of those different features that you can see here, starting at the smallest component. All right, here you have one sarcomere, and it runs the length from this blue zigzag line. That is the Z line. And here you have one myofibril. You have the individual myofilaments that create this one myofibril. All right, and you have mitochondria. All right, those are going to help aid in energy production for that muscle. And the muscles are going to be wrapped around this sarcolemma, and that really is just going to help maintain the unit. All right, this is going to be one skeletal muscle cell or one fiber. So there's a lot of organization and higher levels and smaller levels of organization as you move through the muscle structure. And then here you have an entire bundle of muscle fibers, and you have multiple bundles that create this one muscle group. All right, now I'm not going to go over much of the muscle contraction because you have a good description of those in the crash course videos that you have for this section. All right, but you're going to need the nerve impulse, and this is going to occur at the neuromuscular junction. So if your nervous system is not functioning properly, your muscular system is not going to function properly. Acetylcholine is a very important molecule that's going to be released from a neuron, and it binds to the muscle fiber, and that's going to be the actual stimulus that causes calcium to be released that results in that final muscle movement. Here you have a diagram of that where you have the nerve that is attached to the muscle fiber here, and you see the acetylcholine that's going to be released from this vesicle at the end of the nerve, and then that moves into or touches the end of the muscle, and it binds to the acetylcholine receptor, and then that stimulates the muscle down here to actually move. So for that muscle contraction, you have calcium that is going to be released that combines with troponin, and then that causes the tropomyosin thread around the actin to shift, exposes myosin binding sites, and this is kind of pretty there. This is cool when you see the actual movement of muscle contractions, because you have this myosin head, and it's kind of like this, I don't know, alien-like animal that moves along your muscles to actually create the movement. Finally, you have ATP, and ATP binds to the myosin heads and is used for energy to pull the actin filament toward the center of the sarcomere, and now you have contraction of the muscle. So here's another picture of what's going on with the individual molecules. And I mentioned that ATP is incredibly important. You have to have ATP to trigger muscle contraction. And one thing that I want to point out is after death, muscles continue to produce ATP because of fermentation. And so therefore muscle cells can continue to contract even though the muscles themselves aren't actively undergoing metabolism. But, and that's because there isn't any oxygen. However, because there are molecules left and there's sugar there, right, then your cells can actually undergo fermentation. And so then when ATP runs out, some of the myosin heads are still attached, and they cannot detach, meaning relaxing. And so that causes the rigor mortis, or the very stiff contraction of your muscles, which is often seen at death or after death. And so rigor mortis and body temperature may be used to estimate the time of death, because this is a very well understood process. All right, section 3, again looking at some different terms used to talk about muscle contraction. You have the motor unit, a nerve fiber and all the muscle fibers it stimulates. You have the muscle twitch, that's a single contraction. The summation, an increase in muscle contraction until the maximal sustained contraction is reached. And you have tetanus, maximal sustained contraction. And if you think about the disease, tetanus, or lockjaw, right, that's what tetany is. It's just a sustained contraction, continual contraction. And when you have bacterial infection with Clostridium tetani, that releases a toxin that toxin goes to your muscles, inhibits the acetylcholine, or actually not the acetylcholine, but inhibits the ability of the muscle to relax. Then you have lockjaw, where your jaw is clenched tight. It's locked, so to speak. And that is also called tetanus. And when you have Clostridium tetani infection, you can end up with that. That isn't seen very much in the developed countries because of vaccination, but it is still seen in unvaccinated or underdeveloped unvaccinated countries. All right, muscle tone, continuous partial contraction of alternative muscle fibers, causing the muscle to look firm. So we talk about muscle tone of how flabby our muscles look. Right? If we have good muscle tone, then the muscles are constantly not necessarily contracted, but they simply look firm. Right? So sources of fuel for muscle contraction. There is glycogen and fat that is stored in the muscle itself that can be used at any point in time. And then in the blood, we have glucose and fatty acids that can also be used. And as we go through time, time of exercise, you can see where those different components are being used. Right? Whether it's blood glucose, very low at the beginning of exercise because your muscles are moving, and so they're going to use the muscle glycogen stores that they have. But after a long period of time, right, that stored glycogen is used up, and you no longer have any of it to use. At the very end of that, what's seen here, 4 hours of exercise, so then you use blood glucose, and you use what's floating through your blood as energy sources. All right, in the last slide we're going to look at, and then you can continue to look at the muscle, or the slides here, are just the two types of muscle fibers. Fast twitch and slow twitched. Fast twitch fibers are going to rely on CP, which is creatinine phosphate, to create ATP, and fermentation, or anaerobic. And so these are going to be very fast movement. These fast twitch fibers are adapted for strength. So this could be muscle building or muscle lifting, where you lift a high amount of weight just 1 or 2 times. These muscle twitch fibers are light in color. They have few mitochondria, and they have little or no myoglobin, and that is also a reason in the light color, as well as fewer blood vessels. The slow twitch fibers rely on aerobic respiration, meaning you have to have oxygen. They are adapted for endurance, so marathon runners will have more slow twitched fibers versus the sprinters or the weightlifters. These are going to be dark in color. They have many mitochondria because they are actively going through aerobic respiration and producing ATP in the mitochondria through aerobic respiration. High amounts of myoglobin, and many blood vessels. All right, so you just see this picture here. Marathon runner here, aerobic, steady power, endurance. The fast twitch fibers on the left, anaerobic, explosive power, but also fatigues easily.